Again, I'm Mary Margaret White with Mississippi Today. We're so pleased to have you. Very grateful to our sponsors, the Mississippi Museum of Art, Bradley Aran, and the Mississippi Humanities Council. I want to invite Stuart Rockoff, Executive Director of the Humanities Council, to come and make a few welcome remarks.
Thank you, Mary Margaret. The Mississippi Humanities Council is very pleased to be a sponsor for People, Politics, and the Press. We worked together with Mississippi Today and a host of other partners on the original People, Politics, and the Press back in 2008. And so I am so excited to see this event carry on under Mississippi Today's leadership. The Mississippi Humanities Council is a private nonprofit organization funded by Congress through the National Endowment for the Humanities. Our mission is to create opportunities for Mississippians to learn about themselves and the larger world and enrich communities through civil conversations about our history and culture. And I would be remiss if I did not mention that Mississippi Today has been a valuable partner of ours in this endeavor. Our involvement in this year's event comes from a grant from the Federation of State Humanities Councils funded by the Andrew W. Mellon Foundation. This is a national initiative entitled Democracy and the Informed Citizen, and it highlights the crucial role that journalism plays in our civic life. Each panel, each speaker today, and the work that these journalists have produced, in some cases in just the past few days. I hope you've been reading some of the amazing stories that have been published in Mississippi Today and other outlets. This work has underscored how vital journalism is to our democracy. So thank you for braving the weather and coming out today, for caring about journalism, and for being a part of this year's Civic Engagement Summit. Enjoy the day.
Thank you, Stuart. It is my pleasure to introduce our keynote speaker, Elise Jordan. Elise is a political analyst for NBC News and MSNBC and a contributor to Time. During the Bush administration, she worked in the White House Office of Presidential Speechwriting. In 2007, Elise joined the National Security Council, where she worked on press and communication strategy for the administration's Afghanistan, Iraq, and Pakistan policies. A native of Holly Springs, Mississippi, Elise is a graduate of Yale University and currently lives in New York City. Let's welcome Elise. Thank you so much for having me today, and for everyone who came out on an early Saturday morning in the rain. My brother was claimed that he was en route from Hernando, and that 55 was too bad, but we'll see whether he was just trying to get out and coming to my remarks. I'm proud to be here because I strongly believe that we are at an important moment in history when our civic engagement couldn't be more important. The demise of local reporting in our communities, it only magnifies the emphasis on national politics, and I believe that that's bringing us to a really dangerous point in terms of American unity. I was a little hurt by some of the reactions when it was announced I would be speaking. I thought that we were the hospitality state, but all you lovely folks turned out. I should be used to the online cesspool, and I'm kind of used to it, but you don't ever get totally used to it. And big picture, I'm actually concerned about what it means, the vitriol that is spewing online when it comes to politics, when it comes to engagement. Given the drones and the bombs that were flying around just this week, with pretty minimal accountability from the leaders that we entrust to take lives in the name of our national security, we are living in a time of instability. I try to use history as the lodestar to keep my bearings and distinguish between hyperbole and when there's something we really should be concerned about. And with so much incoming, some of my friends in the Northeast are worried that we're headed down the same road as a scary time in Germany in the 1930s. And Richard J. Evans, he's a preeminent historian of German history and someone whose work I really admire. He gets this question all the time, and I found his answer really interesting. He said that, no, we're not, it's a very different set of circumstances. Post-World War I Europe, there was just so much violence. But then what he is concerned about when it comes to the present day is it's completely different. He says that the level of verbal abuse that we find in public discourse is astonishing. One of the worrying things is the poisoning of political and public discourse through lies and insults. This is poisoning our public discourse, and it's the kind of extremism, the lies, the insults that you did see in the rise of Nazi Germany. So it's an ugly time. There's plenty of dangerous things going on in the world, but it concerns me when I go around the country doing focus groups with people from all walks of life and you hear just how people can't talk about politics anymore with their friends and family. And when did we get to this point where sharing ideas and opinion, it's a public battlefield separating families, friends, and even parts of the country? So thank you to all of you who didn't brand me an enemy just because of who I work for and still came out today. I'm like the Facebook all-talk protester no-shows who apparently melt in rain. And I'm so disappointed because that would have given me way too big of a head. But now that I have you here, I'd like to talk a little bit about the role of the press in a democracy and why, as annoying as the media can be, and I know I'm part of it, I love what we do, but I get, why there are faults with everything. It's dangerous and ultimately self-defeating to dismiss journalism as the enemy. Just so you understand where I'm coming from, here's a little bit of my background. I grew up in Holly Springs, northeastern part of the state. My mom ran the local chamber of commerce until she retired. And my dad grew up in Ashland in Benton County, and he worked selling pharmaceuticals by day, but spent a lot more time selling horses, tractors, guns. I have loved journalism since I was a little girl. My grandfather was a part owner of one of the local newspapers, and I remember going up to the store, and it was a time way before any of the programs that we use now, but you would cut and you'd use glue, and there would be pictures all around, and I just loved it. And that newspaper, the Marshall Messenger newspaper, it was at the time one of 3 in Marshall County and Holly Springs. And it was a big deal to get the ad dollars. My mom went to a grocery store where they weren't advertising, and the whole family got upset. Like it was, still, even then, survival of these newspapers was tough. And so the newspaper eventually folded at the end of the 80s, and then another newspaper that served the African American community folded in the late 90s, and now we're left with one newspaper in Marshall County, the South Reporter, which I still read it every week. And then on Sunday mornings, it was such a big deal to get the commercial appeal, and it would be about that thick, and you would just go through it, and there was everything that you needed. And I, in particular, was obsessed with the classified ads, and I found a Karen Terrier for $25 in Jackson, Tennessee, and my grandfather took me up there to adopt it. But I owe journalism to being lucky enough to get into Yale. I had a great English teacher who started our high school newspaper and became really active with that. And then I don't know if Tom Pittman is here, but I'm going to give him a shout out because I was an intern at his great local newspaper and learned so much and wrote about a 40-pound cantaloupe that was growing. And that served me so well in all of my job, with giving clips, because people would see that clip and be like, whoa, that's 40-pound cantaloupe. But, at age 18, I was just hell-bent that I had to leave Mississippi. And then it's funny how 20 years later, I'm begging my Yankee husband to get back home. But Mississippi was my first real taste of the world and all of its complexity and contradictions. And then Yale sent me on this interesting path to the White House, working for President Bush's speechwriting, working for the commander of U.S. and NATO forces in Afghanistan. And then I started, after the administration, writing columns and freelancing and doing television, and then made the decision to go back to politics in 2016 for Senator Rand Paul's campaign. And when that ended, I joined NBC and MSNBC as a political analyst, and I have to thank Andy Black for taking a chance on me, and I haven't gotten canceled yet, so that's so 4 years in. But I love my job because now what I get to do is I just work the phones talking to all of my friends who are still working at the Pentagon, still working at the State Department, or working on campaigns, and I hear what they're doing, and I'm able to hear their opinion on what's happening from the inside, and then I translate that for our viewers based on my experience having been inside these entities. And so, I mostly talk politics because we are in the era of Trump, but national security is, unfortunately, as we've seen this week, never going to be not a topic. But I'm lucky that no matter where I ventured in the globe, I always had Mississippi to come home to. My dad passed away in 2016, and my mom passed away earlier this year, but all my family's here in Mississippi will always be home. And it's just such a huge advantage being in New York City and having my Mississippi roots. During the 2016 election, when I started at my job commentating, my dad just thought I was way too hard on Donald Trump. It really upset him. And this is what happens, though, when you get to finally say what you think after working for so many principals and high-ranking officials over the years. I was finally liberated to say what I think. And so my dad and I would just argue passionately, probably too passionately, given that he was in the hospital waiting on a heart transplant. But only one argument I ever made to my dad ever resonated with him about Donald Trump. And it's an argument that is totally useless in national media because you have to be from Mississippi to understand it. So I don't know how many people here are familiar with Holly Springs, but like many places in Mississippi, we are known for characters. And we have so many of them, but did anyone here ever make it to Graceland 2? How many people? And even if you didn't make it to Graceland 2, you probably know the legend of Paul McLeod. Called himself the world's #1 Galaxy's #1 Elvis fan. And people really did come from all over the world to check out this museum, this shrine to Elvis that he had, very different from this museum that we are in right now, that was just plastered with everything Elvis. And he told us how he had all these priceless artifacts, it was worth millions of dollars, and I really, I kind of believed it because Elvis memorabilia is worth a lot. And this show was just so amusing, and he was the show. And his behavior was very questionable. He started raising guns on people, maybe one time on my brother, who might have deserved it, but it was funny and entertaining and tolerated until it wasn't. And in the 25th year of the show, in 2014, he killed a man at his shrine to Elvis. His troubled handyman, a 28-year-old man named David Dwight Taylor, who came to collect money for his paint job, and it was over $10. And then Paul immediately died of a heart attack right after, and this was in the national news, and I wrote a big investigation of it, and you go deep into that world and you kind of see how you can respond to entertainment over substance and ignore a lot of the underlying issues. And so that's the tie into Donald Trump. The only analogy that ever got through to my dad, I said that Donald Trump being president is like Paul McLeod being mayor of Holly Springs. People in New York tolerated Donald Trump for years, but because he was crazy and entertaining and not in a position to do real harm. But if we're going to be factually accurate, you listen to the stories, they're very similar to a lot of the stories that Paul would tell that just weren't rooted in reality, and that's my opinion. But now we're in this position of reporting constantly, and the dilemma of reporting on lies that you correct as being factually accurate and still presenting the information as it comes out. So while I'm personally not a fan of Donald Trump, at the same time, I can see where I wouldn't want a bunch of outside press coming in and making fun of our own Paul McLeod. And I'm contrarian enough where I appreciate just how nuts Donald Trump can drive the stereotypical limousine liberal who doesn't want taxes to go up but is morally opposed to Donald Trump. And watching the Democratic debates, there was part of me, I kind of thought, well, Donald Trump, he were on that stage right now, we wouldn't just be hearing boring political platitudes, and it might be a little more exciting. But that's really until we have a week like this week, and you see where impulsivity in foreign policy, it crosses the line from entertainment to downright frightening. And there's a piece of me that will never forget what it was like to be stuck in a trailer in Baghdad's green zone at the temporary U.S. embassy as rockets just rained down, being fired from Shiite militias on the under the command of General Soleimani. So on some base visceral level, you're just happy that that really terrible piece is gone. But and I just think about that particular night, and I prayed my life, but that night, I really prayed, and I didn't want to leave Mississippi to die in a trailer in Baghdad. And I tell these stories now because my mom is in her grave, and while the good Lord had other plans for me, 4 Filipino contractors that were working for the U.S. government on this particular night where we were just getting pounded, they weren't so lucky, and they died and didn't make it home to see their loved ones. So while we feel good temporarily over the killing of someone who deserved to die, we're safe here in Mississippi, and it's different if you've got family posted overseas or someone's your kids are at risk of not coming home if Iran does retaliate. So these questions are very tough, and we have to think these things through. And these are the real stakes. And just when I landed in Jackson, we had a fallen soldier on our plane, and casket covered with the American flag, and everyone on the plane respectfully waited for the fallen soldier to be transported to his final resting place. And they said the name of the soldier, so I wanted to know what the situation was, but couldn't find anything online. Sometimes the DoD won't release names when it is a suicide or a training incident, but then this morning I saw that there were 2 casualties just this week in Afghanistan, so that could possibly be. So Eisenhower said that plans are nothing, but planning is everything. So though policymakers deserve some element of flexibility when implementing a strategy, we have to question when there isn't a strategy, and we have to ask the tough questions, especially when it comes to national security. If everyone is just confused and there's constant chaos, that's weakness, not greatness. So the commander-in-chief, I believe, has a constitutional obligation to have congressional approval for going to war. And you look at just this last week with Iran, the administration provided a briefing that Republican Mike Lee of Utah, who I've never heard raise his voice, called the worst briefing he's gotten in 9 years in the Senate. Americans deserve transparency from their leaders when it comes to these national security decisions that can send our young men and women to war. And I know that, I can sit here, give my opinion, and some of you might think, why should I listen to her? She's left Mississippi, she's become one of them. And I get it. And that's exactly why the mission of this organization, Mississippi Today, is so important. Everyone in Mississippi deserves access to local journalism. They deserve access to reporters and analysts and cartoonists too, like the great Marshall Ramsey, who live in the community and share your concerns and understand your priorities. The slow death of local and regional media, if there's any concern that I have about democracy, it's that you don't see vendors selling the commercial appeal in downtown Memphis. This past Mississippi Senate race, Mississippi Today added so much to the coverage by being out there and telling the stories of a race that it's very unfortunate for some of the reasons that it was elevated to the national forefront. And we need more of this type of reporting if we're going to have an informed electorate. And during the 2016 election, I worked with, as I mentioned, a British polling company conducting over 40 focus groups with every segment of the electorate all over the country. And for 90 minutes, you sit down and you have like-minded voters together, and they just tell you what they think. And anyone I've ever had sit in on one of these sessions, my husband came to one in New Jersey, my brother came in Tennessee. It's really just mind-blowing because you get to hear it directly from voters, what they're thinking, how they come to their conclusions. And you're talking to the voters who actually decide elections. Obama-Trump voters, Democrats, voters of color, independents, and people who just don't fall into any specific category. And so we saw with this group, from our very first focus group we did in Green Bay, Wisconsin, the impact of what now we call fake news. And at the beginning of every focus group, we always say, where do you get your news? And people can go around the table, introductions. People never want to say they get their news from Facebook. But over the course of 90 minutes, so frequently, you hear, oh, well, this on Facebook, and how formative it is actually on decision making. And so, while I'm slightly reassured that fake news was less of a problem in 2018 than in 2016, it's still a problem, and it will be a problem as long as Silicon Valley doesn't enforce any accountability on their platforms. And just like keeping your body strong, you need a healthy diet of information. You can't just be digesting junk all the time. And a Duke study shows that only about 17% of news these days is actually truly local in the papers that have managed to survive. Survival is hard when you consider that 60% of all advertising spending goes to Facebook and Google, and at least in 2017, and 97% of all growth is going to those platforms too, and Amazon's pushing into the market. So traditional or even digitally native news outlets that rely on advertising really are fighting for survival. The financial stress makes it difficult to do the kind of reporting that changes the lives of the men and women in local communities. And just this week, Mississippi Today had a really incredible deep dive on our state operating modern-day debtor prisons. And I just can't even, reading the story, it just took your breath away. I just couldn't believe that this is 2020 in America, and we are keeping people imprisoned over fairly small amounts of money. And I want to recognize the reporters who did the investigation, Anna Wolf and Michelle Liu, if they're here. They analyzed 4 years of data and did this in government records and did this comprehensive deep dive. And that kind of journalism is time-consuming, it's expensive, and it's why what Mississippi Today is doing is so important. And so, keeping, you look at it does though, these journalists are in keeping with Mississippi's storied history, not just in literature, but journalism. You look at Ida B. Wells was from my hometown in Mississippi, and a trailblazer like that at the moment isn't so popular, but journalists really, frankly, shouldn't be popular. If you're a journalist and people like you, you're doing it wrong. I've worked on both sides of the equation, and for people in power, dealing with media, and trust me, I'd rather be feared than loved any day as a journalist. I've heard how the powerful really talk about their journalist, quote, friends. And that's why it pains me, as much as Americans talk about fake news and we hear enemy of the people being thrown around, I'm not actually bothered when Donald Trump uses those terms. We have a president who spends more attention on the press than really anyone in history, and all presidents care about their press. But if the work that journalists are doing is stressing out men in power, men and women in power, you're doing your job. Because the person in America, the president isn't the most important person in America. He works for us, the American people. And we retain control and responsibility for our destinies. And you look at just the far grimmer times of American history: slavery, internment, Jim Crow, the dark days in the Deep South, and millions of men and women, they found a way to rise above and conduct themselves with dignity, no matter how depraved things might have been in the given hierarchy. And that kind of forceful dignity, that's what gives me hope that there are many, many better ways, many, many better days to come. And to close, in Mississippi just this week, you realize how far we have come, though. Mississippi Today's Rick Cleveland had a beautiful piece about his native Hattiesburg and how Hattiesburg's leadership decided to put up a statue of Vernon Dahmer in downtown Hattiesburg. And I can't put it better than 94-year-old Mrs. Dahmer, Vernon Dahmer's widow, as quoted by Rick in his story. Mississippi has changed. This statue is proof of it. And there's much more work to be done, but this is actual human progress. And it's a contrast to what we heard in 1963 in James Silver's seminal article, Mississippi, the Closed Society. And he concluded that the more embattled the closed society becomes, the more monolithic, the more corrupt, the more willing to engage in double think and double talk. Perhaps the greatest tragedy of the closed society is the refusal of its citizens to believe that there is any view other than the orthodox. And Lord knows with Mississippi it was too long in the coming, but I'm glad Mississippi has shown the willingness to have tough conversations. And today I worry about the conversations we aren't having, and we have to have if we are to grow and learn and prosper and enjoy the freedom that is our birthright. Lies can destroy democracy, and so we have to have this conversation and keep the truth accessible through journalism that tells the truth without fear of favor. That's why the mission of Mississippi Today is so very important. And thank you to everyone here today who supports that mission. And I'm happy to take any questions. Does anyone have a question for Elise? Never made it to the museum, which is embarrassing, and I think shows maybe part of the problem. And they had an incredible, the exterior, they would have front pages from all over the country, which I think was really important, but the price of admission, I think, is difficult just commercially in our model in DC, where you have so many great free museums. So I don't think it was anything necessarily against the museum. I just think it's very difficult to have people pay to go into your museum when they have probably 20 to 25 world-class museums to choose from already. So I think it was less a failure of the concept or rejection of journalism than just the financial model.
All right, we got another question.
Could you comment about the National Security Council and the current director's moves to reduce the size of the council?
Wow. So the National Security Council, reducing the size of it doesn't really bother me all that much. It's supposed to be small and nimble and coordinating from other agencies. And so that part isn't really a problem, and it had gotten a bit bloated during the Obama administration. But what concerns me about the NSC today is that it isn't providing the critical duty that it is and the purpose of it, which is to have a process. And as boring as process is, as annoying as it was when I was there, the clearances I would have to go through to get my work going up the hierarchy to make it to the desk of the president, it was a process that existed for a reason, and especially when it comes to the options that the president is being presented with. And so now I hear from people who have worked there and departed, people who are currently there, and it really is a more ad hoc environment where the president is not necessarily getting vetted policy options the way that it is supposed to function in order to bring in the full expertise of the U.S. government. So while I'm always for cutting bureaucracy, it is disturbing the way you see some of these policy formulations coming about.
Well, that'll make you sleep well.
Oh, yeah. I'm hoping, though, with Iran, Donald Trump is really, he's telling allies in the Senate that he doesn't want to escalate. He's hoping that this is it. So let's just hope that the Iranians feel the same way, which is a big wild card.
Hey Elise, thank you for your time. I'm feeling hungry. Apologize for my look. I got stuck in the mud this morning.
Oh, thank you for still coming.
I'm a documentary filmmaker, currently researching education and hunger initiatives in the Mississippi Delta. As a native, what would you see as success? This may not be your field. What would you see as success for education and hunger programs in the state, broadly?
Well, my guest is here, and when I interviewed him for my podcast, he spoke really movingly about the crisis of food deserts in this state, and it just breaks my heart that we have some of the most fertile cropland in the world, and there's no reason that we don't have a better diet and that we have this crisis with food deserts. And that is not my policy expertise, so I wouldn't, I wouldn't want to venture down that path. But I think it should be at the top of the list for policymakers. And with education, I was recently heartened to see that our reading, the reading scores in Mississippi are going up, and there seems to be positive momentum. It's building. So I'm hoping, let's hope that with this next administration in the State House, that it will be a priority.
Time for a couple of more questions.
You mentioned the issues with fake news in Silicon Valley. Who is responsible to do something, and what kind of things should they be doing?
I can't believe that I'm saying this as someone who tends to skew more libertarian, but there is going to have to be some kind of regulation. There just is, because it's at this point, it's a big monopoly, and something has to be done, and I'm not sure how it can be broken up, but it's not allowing any smaller outlets the ability to thrive. And I'm sure that Mr. Barksdale would have better policy recommendations than I would. He probably might disagree with me, but it really, this like hands-off approach, it just isn't working in terms of the news environment right now. And in absence of and I would actually be fine without regulations if, Facebook, for example, wanted to show any forward motion on attacking the problem within. And they have just not, they've shown a complete inability to have accountability for what's up on the platform. And if you're making all of the journalism ad dollars, yet you're not journalism, but you're starving the rest of the industry, we have hit a critical inflection point.
All right, just about two more questions. Hi, you spoke about journalists pressing politicians, and we hear people like former Senator Jeff Flake say things like, in private, 31 senators would do this, or in private, they do this, this, and this. Do you believe that journalists are holding, mostly senators, I would say, Republican senators, accountable? Do you think they're pressing enough?
I think that you have Republican senators who have absolutely no political incentive whatsoever to deviate even slightly until they have a risk of not being primaried. So it's a waiting game until that point. And you can look at the math, you can look at the calendars, and maybe even then, these politicians are going to follow where the polls are going. And you hear a lot of this chatter constantly, but it's a moment of real political cowardice. It is. And I don't see where if journalists are doing interviews and it is off the record or on background, pressing harder, it's not, I don't see where blowing their source is necessarily the answer when it's, a short time, it's not concealing from your audience if it isn't publicly available. So yes, it is, but I understand why the public's frustrated because you constantly see unnamed sources in these articles, and it's a problem that has plagued, just so many generations of reporters. Do you protect sources and keep your information flow, or do you cut off the information flow and be totally transparent? So.
All right, last question for Elise.
Hi, Elise. If you could put on your historian hat for a moment and look 20 or 25 years in the future, and in this very moment, in terms of the policy decisions that are being made by this administration and perhaps even 4 more years, what do you think historians will be saying about this very moment in time 20 to 25 years from now?
I would expect there to be a fair amount of commentary on the short-termerism of our policy decisions, just because it's so hard for politicians to come together on the day-to-day easy questions that to do something like Eisenhower building an interstate or some of the great achievements in national scale takes some kind of unity. And you look at the polarization within our political parties. The two political parties aren't very strong right now. And you see how they are torn from their various camps within the entities, and it's keeping us from actually making any of the hard choices that we need to make for down the road if we are to continue as a strong nation. Thank you.
To carry out throughout the remaining sessions for the day. So we are a little bit behind our original schedule just due to weather. So I think we'll jump right into our concurrent sessions. Here in the main hall, we'll have our Beyond Disasters panel. And if you are interested in Beautiful Agitators, the great documentary theater project between Mississippi Today and Storyworks and several talented actors and journalists, that will be in the back of the gallery. We've got some folks directing traffic to send you where you need to go. So we'll take just a minute to kind of get settled, and we'll start right into our next sessions.